Conversations, episode Jerome Bettis. Longtime listeners, all you shuckers out there, welcome back. And first time listeners, welcome in. Happy to have you guys either way, and hopefully you'll be back with us for future episodes as well. Remember to like and subscribe, follow wherever you're listening. We're on all the major platforms for streaming, especially if you're an Apple Podcasts listener. A like and a subscribe goes a long way there, as well as ratings. And if you are on social media and you'd like to give us a follow or a subscribe to those, we're on all the majors: Facebook, X at KBEX_ATC, Instagram at cornversationspod. And if you'd like to interact with us in a way that is a little bit more private, we've got an email as well, conversationspod@gmail.com. That's where you can stalk back to us. For those of you that do follow us on the socials, you may have seen that card come up earlier in the week. That's really what we want, is engagement here on the show. Let us know what you think. If you like one of our takes, if you don't like one of our takes, if you've got a mailbag question, all of those things are fair game on any of those services. And we do read everything that you send us. So please interact with us. That is what makes this show great. It's what makes this show even better moving forward. Those of you that did see that content card, you might have noticed that we have a mascot. So go ahead and let us know what that mascot's name should be. We're trying some new things out to try and get engagement on those platforms, and we'd love to hear your thoughts there as well. But with all of the plugs out of the way here so far, we've got a lot to get to in this episode. We're going to close the door on the World Cup chapter. The summer of soccer has unfortunately come to an end for the most part. As far as international play, it has certainly come to an end. And we'll go ahead and wrap that up with a little recap. And we'll also finally take a look at the U.S. men's national team and how they finished up. And there is a reason that I decided to wait until this episode to do that, given that we're a couple of weeks on, which I'll get into in that segment. We'll then focus on the topic of the week as far as sports media is concerned, which is the layoffs that ESPN announced earlier in the week. And then we'll finish up with a topic in college football that may have gone under the radar for a number of people, but it will be hard to miss once the season begins. And we'll dive into that briefly to wrap up this episode. And for those of you that are waiting and wondering when college football is going to be back on Conversations, the wait is not going to be much longer because we're just a month or so out from the beginning of the college football season. So I am deep into research already. Those previews will be on Around the Corn Sports blog as they have been in prior years. And we'll, of course, have open dialogue on the podcast as well as we lead up to the season. So if you've got any burning mailbag questions about college football or pro football or, again, anything in general, make sure to send us those as soon as you can so that we can try and fit them into episodes when they make sense. But yeah, World Cup is finally over. We obviously focused a lot on that in previous episodes here throughout the summer, and it was a great World Cup. It really was. We won't wax poetic too much about it, but congratulations has to be given to the Spain national team, obviously the champions, and now a two-time World Cup winner on the men's side. Spain is really rolling when it comes to soccer. They are now the undisputed champions. Never before has there been a country who has simultaneously held the men's World Cup, the women's World Cup, and the de facto U23 men's champion by way of their gold medal in the last Olympics, which really speaks to what Spain is about as a country when it comes to soccer. And what is potentially hopeful, if you're an American listener, is that Spain has not always been a world power when it comes to soccer. In fact, their first World Cup on the men's side was in 2010, and the women's side is really even further behind in terms of when they really became a global power on their side. And it speaks to as much about what culture and having an intention in terms of what you want to do with your federation means to the success on the global stage. And we'll get into that a little bit later when it comes to the U.S. men's national team. But again, it is about trusting the process. And if you have a good process in mind that you want to try to carry forward, then there is a way to see light at the end of the tunnel. And I think Spain is the best example that we've seen really in a generation as far as that goes with global soccer, given that they now have two World Cup titles in the last 2 decades. The women's team is one of the best in the world, whereas, you look back 15 years and they weren't really much of a thought when it came to that side of the game. And obviously, the youth development level is humming as well. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And there's a lot to be said, too, for, again, a team that did not perform well in its first match day going on and actually winning the World Cup. If you recall, Cape Verde drew with Spain in that match day one battle. And shout out to Cape Verde, really, because not only did they draw with the eventual winners, Spain, but they took Argentina to the brink in their knockout round game, the round of 32. And if there was ever an underdog that deserves accolades for what they were able to do, it would be Cape Verde. So there is something to be said as well for being able to inspire not only your own nation, but a lot of people that were rooting alongside you, looking for an underdog story to get behind. But as the World Cup comes to an end, I think it's also a bittersweet moment, and we'll get maybe a little bit dark here for a minute because I think that the World Cup is the only sporting event. It's certainly the only sporting event that I pay attention to closely that has the ability to remind you of your own mortality. So follow along with me for a moment here. And I have to be honest, I didn't come up with this genuinely on my own. I saw a couple of videos of some people doing this, and I really agreed with it because this was the exact type of opinion that I was trying to get across to my wife when I was trying to make my case for watching as many teams as possible. So if she's listening to this or ever gets around to it, she's probably going to come and yell at me hearing this. But I really do think that it has the ability to make you really think because if you look at the math, the average American male's lifespan is about 77 years, and the World Cup comes around every 4 years. So on average, you're getting about 19 World Cups per person in their lifetime. And if you think about the fact that the first two or three World Cups in your lifetime, you're really not going to remember much of, and unfortunately, some of us are not going to remember the last one or two of them as well, then that number gets whittled down from 19 to about 14. And depending on where you're at in your life, obviously, you may or may not be able to look at this even more delicately. But for somebody like myself in their mid 30s, I've already experienced the '06, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2022, and 26 World Cups when I can remember them. And that's another six on top of the three that I don't remember in my lifetime. So we're already at nine at this point out of those 19. And so from the perspective of how many left am I going to have, I mean, I'm almost halfway there, and I think that's why it's so validated that if you were somebody who took a little time to watch some of the midday games or took a little time and prioritized some of the games on the weekends or even maybe took an entire weekend to do nothing but just sit back and watch the games, that it's not something that you really should feel bad about at all. Not that anybody who would have done that would be feeling bad about it, but I'm sure that there were some comments from one or many people about what you were doing, and I'm fully there to support this, to validate it, because you're not going to get so many of these in your life. And every single one of them that you do get is going to be wildly different in terms of how you experience it because of who you are as a person when you're experiencing it. Just 3 World Cups ago, I was just graduating college, no wife, no girlfriend, no house, no real responsibilities, just an ability to enjoy a tournament that up to that point I really had not followed as closely as I do now. And it catapulted me into the next World Cup where I was able to kind of do the same thing. But then from there, things have changed dramatically. A lot of things were going on during this World Cup for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people as well. And that's not going to change moving forward because whereas I was able to watch a lot of these games with friends or by myself or really unattended, with the responsibilities kind of put off to the side, the next time World Cup rolls around, there's a pretty good possibility that I'm going to have a little guy running around with me watching the games as well. So it changes that quickly, and there's nothing else that I can compare it to in terms of sports that I watch where you can say that. The Super Bowl comes around every year. College football comes around every year. March Madness even comes around every year. And while the stories on the court or on the field are different every time, you as a person don't get to so rapidly grow in the period since the last one occurred. And I think that's pretty special. And I think, again, that's why it's validated. If you're somebody who's finally coming out of the cave after a month and a half of doing not much but watching soccer, I'm right there with you. And I think it's very much validated. But we'll get out of that hole a little bit and try to focus on some more positive things. And if I had taken the time to review the U.S. men's national team shortly after they had been eliminated from the most recent World Cup, I think that there would have been a lot of horrid takes from my end because I was pissed. I was not happy with the performance alongside pretty much every other American. And frankly, I was embarrassed because it did feel like for the first time, the performances prior to that game from the U.S. men's national team had finally garnered some level of attention from the casual fan. The casual fan that I have been trying to get into soccer for more than a decade at this point. And finally, the results on the field were starting to speak for themselves, and there was genuine curiosity coming from the non soccer fan about what this team could actually accomplish. And now looking back, sure, there was some naivety. Of course, there was some naivety from the novice soccer fan, but I think there was some naivety as well, even from some people who had spent a lot of time trying not to hype themselves up too much about what the U.S. could accomplish in the tournament. And that all really came crashing down in the worst way possible, in my opinion, because of how it ended. And so I didn't want to talk about it for several days because there were a lot of opinions that were being thrown around. And that's actually what we're going to focus on today is talking about some of the negative prevailing opinions that were put out there by a number of different people. I would almost call them the collective opinion to some extent about what this U.S. men's national team did in this World Cup. And we're going to play fact or fiction with them. I've got 4 pillars of what I see as the main talking points after the 2 or 3 days after the US had been eliminated. And we're going to put these to the test 2 weeks on or so, whether or not they still hold weight or if sitting down and thinking about it a little bit more has maybe turned the tide a little bit and we can look at this in a different way. So to start off with, I want to bring up something that it felt like was a comment that I was hearing from a lot of what I would call the casual fans after the U.S. was bloodied and beaten 4-1 by Belgium in the round of 16, which is that everything prior to that game was effectively invalidated. And I see this as a big fiction because, first off, the numbers are something that has never been done before in a number of cases here. 11 goals by the U.S. across this tournament is the most that they've ever scored. So this is an offensively oriented squad that we've never seen. And even in World Cups where we've had similar success, there has not been the level of offensive explosiveness, the level of technical playmaking on the attacking half of the field. And I do think that that's going to be remembered in a positive way moving forward because there's really nothing else we can compare it to as far as the U.S. team is concerned. 4 goals in a single game. I think that is going to be the main takeaway that a lot of people that want to look back fondly or look back and try to find silver lining in what happened in this tournament are going to point to, because that's also something that had never happened before. 4 goals in a single game. And it's not like this was a situation where the U.S. had beaten up on a team that was going to get beaten up by everybody. In fact, very much the opposite. Paraguay ended up qualifying to get into the knockout rounds and then perhaps pulling off the upset of the tournament by beating Germany in the round of 32. So, in the end, when you look back at the performance, the US was ready, Paraguay was not. The US was clearly the better team on that day. And Paraguay ended up redeeming themselves and looking like a team who was going to give pretty much everybody else in the tournament a very difficult game. So those are two firsts. And you can't take back or take away firsts from any team, any sporting accomplishment. If it's a first, it's going to be remembered. And those will be remembered fondly. The other things that I look at are it's the first time that a US team, has won a knockout game since 2002. So it's been over 2 decades since we've experienced a win or go home situation where we continue to win. And lastly, winning the group stage, as simple as it sounds, has only been done 3 times before. Excuse me, 2 times before. It's been done 3 times total. And one of them was in 1930, which is not really the modern era of the FIFA World Cup. So really it's been done twice in the history of the US men's national team when you consider what we're looking at as far as the World Cup today is concerned. And so when you consider all of these things, while the result at the end is not what anybody was hoping for, there is too much to take away from what transpired before that to call it an invalidated success. Pillar number 2, the primary blame for the blow up in the game against Belgium can be placed on Christian Pulisic. And I think this is the one that's maybe going to bring up the most amount of contention from you guys, because I would also say that this is fiction. And the reason that I would say that this is fiction is not because Pulisic handled the situation correctly, both when he had gotten hurt on the field in the game and his post game comments, but because of who he actually is compared to who we have built him up to be over the course of his career. So let's first talk about the things that we really can't brush aside, which is his handling of the injury in the Belgium game and his post game comments. In the game, when he got hurt around the 50th minute, it was clear that he had injured himself to the point that he was not going to be effective any longer. And I know that there were a lot of former US soccer players who were very critical of his decision to basically shut it down, ask to come out of the game after limping around for 10 minutes or so. But when it came out a few days later that he had actually sustained a deep bone bruise and a microfracture in that leg, I think that's where everybody kind of had to put their foot in their mouth and go, okay, maybe it wasn't a situation where this guy's weak. Because that injury is akin to a baseball pitcher who hurts his wrist or a basketball player who hurts his back and can't do the normal jumping that you would have to do in pretty much every scenario of the game. When you hurt your leg and you're unable to run on it, you're unable to plant on it, you're unable to get a burst of speed, you're effectively neutralized as a player, and especially as a winger like he is. And so the mistake that he made here was not that he got hurt and didn't respond well while he was on the pitch. It's that he didn't get off the pitch quickly enough. The best opinion that I heard from somebody as it was happening or right after the game was from Stu Holden, who consequently is my favorite commentator as far as an American is concerned in soccer. And he basically said it on air. He said, look, if you're hurt, get off the pitch. Don't be limping around. Don't try to be the hero, because you're not the hero anymore. You're just dead weight, and you're actually making it more difficult for everybody else around you. So that was mistake number 1, and that is on Pulisic there. And mistake number 2 is the post-game interview where he basically said, now it's time to rest. And here is where I look at his career and I say, with everything that you've done and all of the pressure that you have uh, on you already, I would have thought that it would have been prudent for somebody like that who doesn't seem super comfortable in front of the camera to have taken a class or a lesson or at least talk to somebody on how to handle the media. Because the worst thing that you can do after a loss like that, and we get it, it's in sort of the heat of the moment still, is to make a comment that gives the perception that, hey, you know what? It's just another game, but now I have a chance to recover and I'll be back better later. Because this wasn't just any game. In fact, this was the most important game of his career. And not only was it the most important game of his career objectively, there were a lot of people watching that don't normally watch that were going to make an opinion on 90 minutes plus of play for this team. And in Pulisic's case, it was about 60 minutes. And so you can't make that comment and expect not to get blowback. But that doesn't mean that he was primarily to blame for this loss, because the thing that I think might be the hottest take of this episode is that while we have built up Christian Pulisic, uh, okay, the media, U.S. soccer, maybe even the team itself has built up Christian Pulisic to be the savior of American soccer, to be Captain America. He does not appear to have the innate leadership qualities that make him the guy who can put a team on his back and do what other players are incapable of doing. And this is kind of a difficult thing to understand if you're not familiar with him as a player and as a person, because we are conditioned and we're expectant that the best players are also going to be the best leaders. Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, LeBron James, these guys can, Kobe Bryant, can put teams on their back. Not only are they the best player on the field every time they step onto the field, but they're also the best leaders. And while leadership is something that I do think you can learn, there are some innate qualities that you're either just kind of born with and you develop as a human being, or you don't. And I don't know that Christian Pulisic is that type of person. I don't think that it's a coincidence at all that two different managers from two different World Cups have decided to put the captain's armband for the U.S. on different players. In 2022, it was Tyler Adams. In 2026, it was Tim Ream. Christian Pulisic at this point is in the prime of his career. He's 27 years old. He is old enough where if the leadership qualities were going to be there, that they would be there by now. And he would be wearing the captain's armband, despite the fact that Tim Ream was the elder statesman. And this is unique, not just for sports, but for the U.S. soccer team in general, because when you look back to previous teams, Landon Donovan, best player on the team, captain. Tim Howard, at points in his career, best player on the team, captain. We are used to the best player on the team also being the best leader, being the captain, being the vocal, calming effect both on and off the pitch. And I don't think that that is Christian Pulisic. And so because he's not the leader, he's the best player. I don't think anybody is debating that. Even the players themselves, the former players themselves who have been critical, nobody is debating the fact that he's the best player on the team. But he isn't the leader of this team. And so for that reason, I don't think that you can place all of the blame on him. Now, at the same time, and Tim Howard on his podcast, I think it's called Unfiltered, made a good point, and it's the obvious one, which is that when you are the best player and you make the most money and all of the eyes are on you, this is what that comes with, is that you're going to have a lot of the blame placed on you as well. But is it accurate that the blame should be placed on him? And I think looking back at this and looking at what we've seen throughout his career, the answer is no. Again, this is a guy who's been hurt in his club career as well. But when you look at what he's done when he's healthy, he doesn't have to be the leader on those teams either. And he's done very well. It's almost as if the pressure really does get to this guy. And for people who are not natural born leaders, that's not uncommon. Pillar number 3 is also going to look at where the blame is placed. And the question is, or the pillar is, Mauricio Pochettino, the manager of the U.S. men's national team, did not do enough as a manager to put this team into position to break through the glass ceiling. We're 3 for 3 now. I would look at this and I would say this one is fiction as well. I think you can go back to game 1 and you can pretty much discount this opinion that he didn't do enough because the team was ready. And if from a managerial perspective, there were going to be issues that could be placed primarily back on what Mauricio Pochettino did with this team, it would have come out as early as game 1. There was a lot of pressure on this team. We just talked about how the best player might not be the best leader. There was a lot to prepare for Pochettino. And I think it can be argued that we have never seen a U.S. team in a World Cup more prepared coming out of the gate than they were in Los Angeles against Paraguay. And that does go back to the manager because there were all sorts of storylines hovering around this team. He had a couple of years to get ready for this tournament. It's on home soil. There are lots of instances where you can look at a team that does not deliver in those circumstances, and you can say, well, you know what? They weren't ready. And if they weren't ready, then a lot of that's going to come back on preparation. Preparation is what the manager is there for. That did not happen. Additionally, I think that if you had given Pochettino a full cycle with this team, then there may have been an ability to have a better result against a team like Belgium. We have to remember that Pochettino didn't take this job until September of 2024. And that was a couple of months after a pretty disastrous Copa America, which frankly was the last time that the U.S. team was able to face competition that was going to be akin to the type of competition they were going to face deeper in this World Cup. And that was not a team that Pochettino was responsible for. A lot of the confidence that the team had going into that tournament was destroyed based on how they performed there. And then you're having a managerial change right after that as well. So I think that Pochettino was coming in almost looking to do damage control for a good 6 to 8 months before he was actually able to try to implement what he was going to do for this World Cup. So it would have been interesting to see him get a full cycle, and it's a conversation for a different day as to whether or not he might stick around for another full cycle and coach this U.S. team in the 2030 World Cup. But if he had gotten that full cycle, I wonder whether there would have been a better result against Belgium. Because there really wasn't an opportunity to face a team of that caliber, to have the pressure about going up against a team that on paper and in the rankings is better than you. They just didn't have that opportunity in a high stakes scenario. And I do think that that ended up hurting that team. But Pochettino did about as well as you could have done given the circumstances. I think he made the right pull of strings. I think that they were ready for the games, at least in the group stage, and they were able to accomplish a lot of things that other teams hadn't before. And so you look at that and you say, again, there's no way that you can place the majority of blame on the manager, given all that went right for the team. And then number 4, and this is kind of a hybrid pillar. It's a combination between the gap still exists between the U.S. and what we would call true contenders for a World Cup title, and simultaneously that the U.S. development, the U.S. youth system, is broken and primarily to blame for the U.S. being unable to break through that glass ceiling. And this is where I'm going to finally put a fact stamp on the prevailing opinion that has already been established here in the weeks preceding, or excuse me, post World Cup loss for the U.S. We could spend an entire episode. We did spend some time in an episode about a month ago talking about the youth system and how we're not yet at a point where we are developing players in a way that really can compete with the best in the world. And that hasn't changed. It's clear that that hasn't changed. Pochettino made comments about how the US team to some extent is coddled compared to other teams. There's not an innate drive in certain ways that you can't teach. And until we change the youth system and it's not a country club sport and it's not a situation where money and decisions from people from a financial standpoint are making more of an impact than what is actually going on with the play and the technical skill and who we're bringing in to teach these kids, this is not going to change. This is not a situation where, hey, if we just had our best athletes, that we would go and we would win the World Cup. We have all of the athletic talent in the world compared to everybody else in the world. We have all of the potential resources and funding compared to everybody else in the world. But somehow, small nations like Croatia and Morocco are able to get further in consecutive World Cups than the US has ever been. And that has everything to do with what's happening at the grassroots level and at the youth development level. There's a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of how to build a culture where you're creating that type of environment. And until all of these things change, and frankly, I don't know how they're going to change. I think there's a lot of question marks still about how to make those changes a reality. Because if we knew the answer, there's already been enough money that's been offered up to make that happen. And clearly, the interest would be there from the American viewer if the US was truly a contender. Clearly, what we've seen from this World Cup is that the interest is already there when the perception that there may be a chance that the glass ceiling could be broken through is there. That's about all we've got for soccer for a while now. Obviously, we're going to switch to American football in upcoming episodes. But if you do have any questions or comments or takes that you'd like to share with us, again, we're on all the major social platforms at KBEX_ATC on X, at cornversationspod on Instagram, and we're always open for mailbag questions and comments at our email address, cornversationspod@gmail.com. We'll go ahead and shift now to the latest round of ESPN layoffs. And the reason that I want to cover this is not to rip ESPN as I've been known to do on this podcast and to an extent feel like is justified, but to actually take a softer approach with regards to this latest round of layoffs. Because every time that this happens, and this has become an annual ordeal, that ESPN sheds itself of dead weight might not be the right word, but expensive personalities. People get up in arms and most recently have started to lash out at the people that are still left behind at the company. And I think that this is a little bit unfair because despite ESPN making decisions that nobody is happy about, and people losing their jobs is never a thing that people are going to celebrate, it's not the wrong decision. When ESPN announced that they were laying off a new crop of former employees, including the likes of Ryan Clark, Cam Newton, Carl Ravitch, and Tom Pelissaro, formerly of the NFL Network, it's the names that get everybody up in arms. And in addition, this time, it's the way that they went about letting people know that they were no longer part of ESPN. In the case of Ryan Clark, he was actually on air with NFL Live, and during a commercial break is when he found out that he was no longer with the company. And in the case of Carl Ravitch, this is a guy who had been with the company for 33 years as both an anchor and then more recently as the host of Baseball Tonight and Sunday Night Baseball's play-by-play. But really what this is about and what it has been about for the number of years that ESPN has been laying off notable members of their staff is that the game has already changed when it comes to media and how media is consumed. And because ESPN is so big, their reaction to it is just incredibly delayed. When you think about what Ryan Clark and Cam Newton in particular brought to the table for ESPN, you really start to actually side more with what ESPN has been doing. And that's that Ryan Clark and Cam Newton are personalities that are specialized. They talk about football. And for the most part, society doesn't consume specialized content via cable network television. If you want specialized, in depth information about a particular sport, you're going to go to a podcast. And that's the thing about these recent layoffs is that these guys are, for the most part, going to be fine. Cam Newton said it himself. He said, look, we all have our podcasts already. We're already doing things that are going to set us on a course where we'll be able to land on our feet. And so, what ESPN was doing with these personalities is just essentially doubling down on what society is already consuming when it comes to NFL content that's not actual games. And it's not really needed anymore. And I think that when people look at what ESPN used to be and the nostalgia for what they used to consume when it comes to ESPN, there's this anger that ESPN can't be that anymore. Well, ESPN, they've gone by the wayside. They used to be a proper channel. They used to get me up at 7 in the morning to watch Sports Center, and then I would parlay that into College Game Day, and then I would watch their actual programming for college football, and I would stick around until college football final and the post college football final Sports Center, and it would be an all day affair. And we haven't been consuming sports media like that for over a decade at this point. So the way I look at it is a lot of these layoffs are actually overdue. And while we're never going to get back what ESPN originally was and what we all fell in love with as sports fans, I think that they are taking the best approach that they can to try to salvage what they do have left. And maybe you don't agree with it. Maybe you don't like Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee and their sensationalist takes. Maybe that's why you're listening to Conversations. That's the whole premise of why we're a broad sports podcast, is that there really isn't enough non-sensationalist broad sports entities out there. And so we looked at it as a window. But ESPN is looking at it as a life raft. And if they're going to pay lots of money, something around the ballpark of about 100 million, if JJ Watt and others that are bashing Pat McAfee are correct, they're going to need to put all their eggs into those two baskets. And honestly, if you're a listener of Pat McAfee and of Stephen A. Smith, that's what you want anyway. That's what's going to bring eyeballs and viewers to the platforms. Unfortunately, in Ryan Clark and Cam Newton's case, you're probably already consuming their podcast and they're not going to lose you as fans, but you probably weren't coming back to NFL Live or First Take every morning either. The one I really feel bad for is Carl Ravitch, but again, you look at that situation, the guy had been around for 33 years at ESPN. He's probably making more money than he's worth at this point. And ESPN has pretty clearly signaled that they're going a different direction from what Ravitch was still there for, which was the baseball package that they've essentially jettisoned off to other networks, and they don't even have Baseball Tonight anymore. Going from that topic, then, we're going to end with the college football news. This is actually a couple of weeks old now, but I think it probably fell under a lot of people's radars that aren't following story by story college football in the offseason. And this was an announcement by the Big 12 that they have become the first conference to include co branded patches on jerseys for the teams part of the conference for both college football and the men's and women's basketball program. The announcement was made that Monster Energy will partner with the Big 12 to become the Monster Energy Big 12 football and Monster Energy Big 12 basketball sponsor. So, effectively, what's going to happen is that every team in the league is going to have a co branded patch on their jerseys for football and basketball. The reason that this started to become more of a story than just Big 12 becomes a first mover is that the deal is only worth $20 million, or roughly about $1 million per school worth of revenue for the conference. And a lot of people looked at this and said, this is objectively a horrible deal for the Big 12. They lost all their leverage in terms of what they're going to be able to do to promote this type of partnership in the future. And they may have also hurt the individual school's ability to make deals for non-affiliated sponsorships that might go on jersey patches in the future. But the way I look at it is they are still a first mover. This is the first instance of this happening in college athletics since the NCAA ruled that this was a possibility. And when you're a first mover, you're going to get some benefit that others do not get to benefit from. So, from that perspective, I think that dipping your toe into the water and having a deal like this is still a good move. It's still small enough, too, where they can learn from it. They can evaluate whether or not it's working for their needs, both sides, of course. And if it isn't working for their needs, then they can easily change the arrangement. Somebody that that I used to work with had a what I would consider a famous saying that I think holds true and that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but it's very true that contracts are just a piece of paper. And in this case, if it's a relatively small contract, it's a relatively thin piece of paper that'll be easy to rip up if necessary. And so I think what you're going to see happen is that the rest of the leagues, conferences in the NCAA are going to take note of this. They're going to make their own deals. You're going to start seeing them get bigger. And depending on how it works out with the Big 12 and Monster Energy, you're going to see that deal get ratified and it'll be much larger, or you'll just see them go in a different direction and they'll be able to make their money on the back end while also having that experience from a deal that'll be pretty easy to wiggle out of if they need to. Curious what your thoughts as listeners are on that deal, though. This will be the first time that we'll see a sponsor, a corporate entity outside of the jersey maker on a college football uniform. So I was listening to another podcast the other week. Shout out these guys. And they were talking about what potential sponsorships you might see from various conferences and teams across the country. And I think that's always a fun exercise, but I won't spoil that because that was absolutely their idea. So go check them out. That's Joey Molinaro, the guy that does all the impersonations of various sports sports personalities, and Benny Polizzi, the Who's Buying This Guy. Really good podcast. I'd love to get him on there if they're willing to ever come on this show. Would love to have them on there. But yeah, go check that out if you want kind of the rundown that I would have done on this topic. That is all I have for this episode. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Again, one more time, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, give us a like on all the socials or your streaming platform of choice. That really helps us and gets our name out there to people who have not yet discovered us yet. Um, Another reminder, we've got a mascot out there. Let us know what we should name that guy, or if we should even have him in future promotion cards on the socials. And lastly, let us know, now that the World Cup is over, what are you most looking forward to in the sports calendar? We're still about a month out from football getting its legs. So we've got a pretty wide gap of things that we would need to have cover that spot. So your comments will help us determine what we want to cover in future episodes. So look at it that way. You telling us what you want to hear is what you're going to hear if you're interacting with us. All right, but at this point, we're starting to ramble, so it is time to wrap it up. Enjoy anything that you guys are watching in sports, and until the next episode, take it easy, Shuckers.